Frick, we're losing money rapidly. We must do something.
You are right, Mr. Carnegie. I'm closing the mill. It will break them in a few days, and they will kiss our feet to get back to work. Trust me, I know what I'm doing.
Summer 1892, Homestead, Pennsylvania. A small steel town on the brink of chaos. In the heart of the steel mill, tensions between workers and management reach a boiling point. With an unyielding spirit and united voices, the workers stood resolute against powerful industrialists in a battle that would become a defining moment in the history of labor rights. Welcome to Economic Rhapsody, the channel that discovers history to understand the future. And today, we're not going to explore just another big work conflict. We are going to explore the mother of all work conflicts, the Homestead Strike. So please subscribe to support our channel, and let's get started. Our story begins 57 years earlier in Dunfermline, Scotland. In a very modest house, a cute baby was born to the Carnegie family. His name was Andrew Carnegie. The streets of Dunfermline were lined with hard-working craftsmen who knew no peace in their tough lives, working around the clock to make the most basic living. As a son of a struggling handloom weaver, young Andrew's early years are marked by financial hardships, or in more direct words, poverty. The future didn't seem bright, but destiny had different plans for Andrew Carnegie. In 1848, the Carnegie family, driven by dreams of prosperity, set sail for the land of opportunities, America. They arrive in Allegheny, Pennsylvania, where Andrew, merely a teenager, begins work in a cotton factory for a monthly wage of $5. Now $5 doesn't sound much to you, right? So think again, because $5 of 1848 is equivalent to around $180 in 2023. Boo! Yeah, I know. Still sounds low, but hey, Andrew worked only 12 hours a day and only 6 days a week.
What?
Well, in Pennsylvania in those days, slavery was already against the law. But apparently, such an insulting wage combined with crazy working hours was kind of acceptable. Especially alongside the immigrant stream of poor European dreamers who were desperate for work. As we will further see in this video, workers' rights were not exactly developed in those times. But anyway, let's run a bit forward from Carnegie's depressing youth. Through wit, charisma, mastering the art of making connections, and successful investments, Carnegie made his way up the business ladder with an unwavering commitment to innovation. And his focus? Steel. A material destined to shape the modern world. He dived into the industry with tenacity, and in no time he stopped being a big name in the steel industry. He was the industry. You need to remember that we are at the peak of the Industrial Revolution. Railroads, bridges, skyscrapers, and machinery, all of them needed steel. A lot of steel. There were times when Carnegie was considered to be the richest man on the planet. By the late 1880s, Andrew Carnegie, the poor Scottish boy, stood as the titan of the American steel industry. And every titan with countless amounts of businesses and investments needs a trusted ally. Henry Clay Frick was a sharp businessman with an iron will, and more important, he was a coal magnate. And which material can be more valuable for a steel company than coal? Same coal that gives life to the huge melting ovens in the steel mills. It was the perfect match. They had completely different personalities. While Frick was a tough and cold businessman, some would say cruel, Carnegie was much softer, especially when it comes to their approach to workers and labor unions. You can Google Andrew Carnegie's philanthropy to learn more about his personality. Together, Carnegie and Frick become a formidable duo, consolidating power and resources. With Carnegie's steel and Frick's coal, they were two of the most dominant figures in the American economy, alongside other titans of that era, such as John D. Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan, and the last one, by the way, will ultimately purchase the Carnegie Steel Company for $492 million, which are around $18 billion of our days and what was considered as the largest industrial transaction of all times. Anyway, Carnegie felt very comfortable letting talented Frick to run his business. But with great power comes great responsibility and even greater challenges. As their empire grows, so does the unrest among their workforce, setting the stage for one of the most dramatic chapters in labor history, the Homestead Strike. But to understand the authentic roots of the strike, we need to take a closer look at the lives of the people who worked hard in the dark and dangerous environment near the tall smokestacks. Imagine yourselves entering a huge underground space. Inside, you see intense flames lighting up the tired faces of dirty and sweaty workers. The steel mills weren't just ordinary factories, they were extremely hot places where men worked with melted metal. The air was full of black dust, and the constant clang of hammers striking steel was the dominant sound in the background. These workers had to endure very long shifts, often working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and all under these awful conditions. The steelworkers' life was tough. Just think about the dangers they faced every day: painful blisters, burns, and the ever-present danger of severe accidents that could harm or even kill them. Needless to mention, when they got injured, they could expect zero support for themselves or their families while they couldn't work and earn a living. The extreme heat from the furnaces never let up, causing the ground to shimmer like a mirage. Their work wasn't just a regular job, it was a constant struggle against a harsh environment. A struggle to survive. In the late 1800s, the landscape of the U.S. was charged with worker unrest. From miners in the West to factory workers in the East, everyone felt that they deserved more. This sentiment led to a growing movement of laborers striving to upgrade their work conditions. The Amalgamated was the big union of the steelworkers. They were their major voice, pushing for a better life for the men who courageously worked in those blazing furnaces every day. In the beginning, they were strong, rallying the workers behind them and securing better wages, shorter hours, and safer working conditions. They became a power that was strong enough to make even the most hard-nosed employer listen to them. It's not like everything went smoothly, but the union became a symbol of hope for the workers. But as the spring of 1892 unfolded and the contract that the union signed with Carnegie and Frick was about to expire, storm clouds were gathering over the town of Homestead. The rich duo planned to cut workers' wages significantly. The bad signs were clear, and one sign was taller and more foreboding than the rest: a fence. Homestead Steel Mill had become a fortress. Before a single worker had even declared their intent to strike, Henry Clay Frick had already erected a massive fence around the mill. Dubbed by the locals as Fort Frick, this barrier wasn't just a physical one, it symbolized the growing tension between management and labor. As workers clocked into their harsh shifts, they walked past this towering structure, a daily reminder of the impending showdown and of management's intent to control the narrative and, if necessary, the battlefield. The Fort Frick was only the beginning. Behind its walls, another layer of defense was being organized: the Pinkerton Detective Agency. Pinkerton was a private security force with a controversial reputation. These agents were hired to guard the mill and allow strikebreakers to get in and replace the workers in case of a strike. These actions of Frick just escalated the situation. The stage was set and the players were ready. A small steel town was about to capture the nation's attention as the battle lines of the Homestead Strike were drawn. July 2nd, 1892. The Amalgamated's contract expired, and as the dawn breaks, news spread swiftly that negotiations with the management have collapsed. The union declared a strike. Workers were unwilling to accept the wage reductions proposed by Frick. They knew that such cuts would push many families into the depths of poverty. For the workers, this wasn't just about money, it was about dignity, about their right to a decent life. The very core of their existence was under threat, and they were prepared to do whatever it took to defend it. Frick's response was swift and unyielding. Not only that he refused to step back from the wage cuts, but he also made a fateful decision to close the mill entirely. His strategy was clear.
I will starve the workers into submission. The union must go.
It did make sense. I mean, without their daily wages, how long do you think they could hold out? A few days later, on July 6th, there was a dramatic day in Homestead. By morning, the town was abuzz with rumors that a force of Pinkerton guards was approaching, sent by Frick to take control of the mill. The workers, their families, and supporters from the town gathered, prepared to defend their livelihoods. And indeed, later that day, 2 tugboats emerged on the Monongahela River, pushing barges loaded with around 300 Pinkerton agents. Their mission: securing the mill in the name of Frick and Carnegie. As they neared the land, a sea of workers stood resolute, determined to prevent their landing.
Go away! Nothing good is waiting for you here!
Shouts and threats filled the air as tension reached its peak. But what started as a verbal confrontation soon took a tragic turn. The first shot was fired. It's unclear which side shot first, but within minutes, the river's banks transformed into a war zone where bullets whizzed by as both sides exchanged deadly volleys. The Pinkertons, though well armed, were not prepared for such determined resistance. Most of them were just hired solely for that mission, and for only $2.50, which is around $80 in 2023. Not something that is worth dying for, but they obviously hadn't been told about the real situation in Homestead. As they tried to disembark, they faced a hail of gunfire and were forced to take cover behind the steel walls of their barges. The scene was chaotic. The sounds of gunshots mingled with the screams of the injured. By the end of the day, 7 Pinkertons and 2 strikers lay dead, with many more wounded. The water of the river, which had once reflected the industrial might of Homestead, was now tainted with blood. As the sun set on that fateful day, the Pinkerton Guard surrendered, defeated by the strikers that against all odds had managed to repel the formidable force sent to quell them. Victorious, the strikers marched the captured agents through the town. They forced them to walk ahead of the crowd, their hands raised in surrender. The Pinkertons were dressed in their distinctive black uniforms, but the strikers had stripped them of their weapons and badges. The strikers jeered and taunted the Pinkertons as they marched, called them names, spat, and threw things over them. The Pinkertons were humiliated and ashamed. They had been sent to break the strike, but they had been defeated. They were now prisoners of the strikers, and they were being marched through town like criminals. The march lasted for several hours, and the Pinkertons were forced to walk through the streets of Homestead where everyone could see them. They were a symbol of the strikers' victory and the Pinkertons' defeat. When the march was finally over, the Pinkertons were taken to a makeshift prison. They were held there overnight before being released the following day. For a brief moment, there was jubilation among the workers. They had faced down one of the most powerful private armies in America and emerged victorious. They felt invincible, and their spirits were lifted. But this euphoria was short-lived. The state could not stand by and watch as one of its towns descended into chaos. Within days, a new force arrived in Homestead, dwarfing both the strikers and the Pinkertons in size and strength: the Pennsylvania National Guard. Sent by Governor Robert Patterson, 8,000 troops took control of the mill and the town. The presence of the National Guard marked a turning point. The state had effectively sided with Frick and Carnegie, ensuring that the mill could resume its operations, even if it meant doing so without its striking workers. And I'm wondering, what caused the governor to take this direction? Think about that. Homestead of those days counted around 15,000 people. Most of them, if not all, were financially tied to the steel mill. In the governor's decision of supporting Frick and Carnegie, he actually gave up on thousands of potential voters. Why would he do that? I invite you to comment with your ideas and thoughts. And guys, if you made it until this point, please subscribe to the channel. Just click this purple button in the lower right corner, now as we speak, and I will be more than grateful. Anyway, after the Pinkertons were repelled, Carnegie Steel Company sought non-union laborers, mainly outsiders, to get the mill back in action and break the strike. These strikebreakers only exacerbated the tension. In the eyes of local workers, these replacements betrayed the collective fight for labor rights. Clashes between strikers and strikebreakers became commonplace. With the support of the National Guard, Carnegie Steel Company transformed the mill into an impenetrable fortress. Inside, the strikebreakers not only worked, but also took shelter, protected from the hate beyond the walls. Their movement in and out of the facility was guarded meticulously by the troops. The inclusion of these replacement workers shifted the balance of power. The striking workers, once united and defiant, began to feel the strain of lost wages and the pressure of the state's military intervention. As days turned into weeks, solidarity started to wane. The public, initially sympathetic to the workers' cause, grew weary of the violence and disruption. The union's bargaining power, once an imposing force, weakened as Frick's strategy to starve them into submission became brutally effective. The strike was ultimately broken 4 months later, on November 20th, 1892, when the strikers agreed without much choice to return to work in the mill, but now without the union contracts. That's it for today. Important to mention that the story of the Homestead Strike is much more complex than what I could cram in a 15-minute video. One notable event we haven't touched upon is the assassination attempt on Henry Clay Frick. Amidst the turmoil, anarchist Alexander Berkman tried to kill Frick in his office to support the striking workers. Frick was shot and stabbed but managed to subdue Berkman. He even continued his workday after receiving medical treatment. This event underscored the volatile atmosphere and the strong feelings that both management and workers had at the time. It's also worth mentioning that the public images of Carnegie and Frick took different turns. While Carnegie later engaged in large-scale philanthropy, endearing himself to many, Frick's reputation remained more controversial, especially considering his hard-line stance against labor unions and workers. Both men were undeniably captains of industry, but the strike painted them in contrasting shades in the public eye. In the long term, the Homestead Strike had significant consequences. It was a setback for labor unions in the short term, but it also shone a spotlight on the desperate conditions faced by workers. The strike paved the way for public debate on labor laws, eventually leading to reforms that offered better protections for the American workforce. While the immediate aftermath was bleak for the workers of Homestead, the events that contributed to broader changes in the American labor landscape, making it a pivotal moment in the struggle for workers' rights. If you like it, tell your friends, and if not, tell me. I invite you to subscribe and check out our other videos, where we bring many more fascinating economic events from history to life. Economic Rhapsody. See you soon.